We have been really putting pressure on the Biden-Harris administration to effectively represent young people and give young people actual seats at the table by establishing an independent Office of Young Americans within the executive office of the president and having a director of youth engagement as part of federal staff who oversees this and has young people has a way to bring young people into the fold on domestic and foreign policy issues, and really creating a way to make sure that at the highest level of government, we don't forget our youngest constituents.
Hello everybody, welcome to Different Boat Same Storm. This is another deep dive that we're doing today, and I'm really excited about the guest because we've known each other for a while and there's so much that we have in common and yet have not met even once. But I guess that's the world that we live in today. Today our guest is Kalkar, who is a Monk 1 and U of T alum, and currently, and almost all the time really, she's doing tons of things all across the board, all very exciting, all very novel. So excited to have you today, Uma.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. Now, our audience will find out about this very soon when the bio goes out, but it's popping, and there's a lot of moving pieces there. So why don't I let you take the stage and introduce you, and then let you introduce yourself as you see fit.
Yeah, well, I mean, before I introduce myself, I also want to bring up the fact that, you said we don't really know each other, but we have so many people in our circles that are connected. And I just realized that it was actually Professor Teresa Kramars who, way back last summer, had connected us, and we spoke on the phone about ways to get, young people involved in social causes. And I just think it's so funny to see this, 1 year later, like full circle, we've both achieved that. And so really a lot of literally speaking on the phone with each other and wishing it into action.
Absolutely. The universe, we will the universe.
Exactly. We literally did that. I credit all of my success to that phone call.
Absolutely. That's what it took.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, I was a U of T student. I still am. I can't get enough of it, but I'm doing the whole Monk trifecta. I did Monk 1. It was a phenomenal program. I recommend it to everybody who is thinking about going to the University of Toronto because the program is so unlike anything you will experience in the rest of your undergrad. They take 25 freshman year students and they say, here are the world's most challenging, intractable problems that no one has figured out. Solve one. And and you kind of sometimes, I think for me, in undergrad, I needed to be kind of thrown to the sharks like that in order to see what exactly it was that I was interested in and where I wanted to take my further studies and my other kind of involvements. And so from there, I did peace, conflict, and justice studies as my major, and now I'm coming back to Monk to do my graduate school. I'm doing a double degree master's, currently at Sciences Po for the first leg of this journey, and I'll be back in the fall at Devonshire doing the Master of Global Affairs. But yeah, so that's my kind of academic background. On top of that, I'm very, very passionate about civic opportunity and engagement, as well as how that kind of interfaces with digital technologies and policies that can allow us to have a more responsible and ethical digital outlook. I am the innovation. Can you cut that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm the innovation director of 18 by Vote, which is a phenomenal youth-led organization that focuses on getting young people ages 15 to 19 all across the U.S. to learn kind of how, where, and when, and why really to vote. And we've been really scaling up our operations and having had a great turnout over the past election cycle to get all these young people involved with our election systems and cycles, and having people to kind of understand a bit more about the processes and policies behind how their local governments as well as their more flashy like national and state level governments work.
Wow. I mean, just hearing that, it's such a lofty ideal to work towards, but it's so worthy that why would he not work towards it? And it's fascinating to hear all of that. And I'm curious, I'm sure that, or rather, I'll pose this a question. Was this sort of get on the field, hand out pamphlets to young students and go on rallies kind of a movement? Or did you take a different approach? Because I'm so curious.
Definitely. So we definitely used to have a lot of those, and then COVID hit. So COVID really posed this huge challenge to our organization because traditional ways of voter outreach, namely, going into high schools and colleges and being in person, all of that was really, it was out of the question during the election. And so we had this problem where it was an upward battle of two regards, right? Number one is getting young people to get out and vote, because youth have historically one of the lowest voter engagement turnouts ever in any sorts of elections in the States. And then the second was, how do we get young people as well as other Americans who are voting for the first time by mail-in or absentee voting ballot systems to be able to go through the whole process and have this ability to exercise their vote, even if it's not in the kind of traditional way that they were used to or that they've heard about growing up, or that they've seen their parents or their family members or siblings take part in. So what we really did was we focused on leveraging this digital aspect, and we went really hard on digital outreach because, hey, it makes sense. If you want to reach young people, you have to reach them where they're at. And they're on, most of them at least, on some form of online medium or digital communication, just like we are right now. and get them to see that voting, although it can be seen as something that is a little bit of a chore at times or is archaic even for some people, is something that's very important for their day-to-day lives, and have that brought to them where they're at so they can understand it, comprehend it, and enact on it.
Absolutely. By the sheer amount of TikTok content that the average teenager consumes, it seems to be the only natural way to get to them. Just throw that in every now and then. Civic responsibility amidst Shrek memes. It seems to be the only way to go. But
and it's been so successful.
I know, right? Wow. Yeah, it makes sense. But that makes me wonder that why is this seemingly totally natural idea so novel? Why has it not been done before? Where's the hindrance?
So I really think that the issue is that a lot of people don't really consider the youth vote. They don't consider youth problems. And by people, I mean politicians. It's been a very new phenomenon, really, for young people to be a demographic that you have to kind of listen to or cater to or even acknowledge. Historically, young people have been considered, always at the end of policy issues. There's always kind of some sort of youth are tacked on at the end of some sort of policy idea or framework or proposal. There's not a lot of resources devoted to engaging with young people because there's this concept young people don't vote, so it's not even worth it anyways. And this creates a cycle of disengagement that then leads into disinterest that can also cause apathy on both the parts of the elected officials and also the young people that are involved in the in this cycle. And so I think it has to become really something that's more so focused on understanding that youth have a power unlike any other, especially right now. Young people, demographically speaking as well, are one of the largest groups that make up the electorate now. And it's time to kind of show people that the power of youth is not just a lip service or like a fun tagline to throw out and say we are the future, but it's time to give young people seats at the table. And conversely, if they don't, we'll pull up the chair ourselves.
Right. I love that so much, that if they don't, you just pull up the chair yourselves. Because that was going to be my next question, is that I'm sure that this revolution, if I may put it that way, would probably not be, at least in my mind when I think of it, not received all too well by the status quo, because it challenges their power and their authority. So I'm curious if there are any stories that come up on that front from your experiences there.
So we actually did not experience a lot of backlash with the work that we were doing on engaging young people in communities and having them operate through this peer-to-peer network to get their friends and their family members and, you know, just their, like, all these people in their own communities involved and getting them out to vote. We didn't experience any backlash per se with it, but interestingly enough, what we saw was that there has been a really big gap in these programs that are available for young people to engage themselves in civic opportunities in a lot of pockets of the U.S. And so that kind of shows, well, this is an issue that needs to change. And there's a really good think tank out of Tufts University called Circle that has talked about this phenomenon at large. It's called areas that are deemed as civic deserts. And this idea also that, well, voting is a habit, and if you want to have a good habit form, you have to do it consistently for quite a long time. And if we don't give young people opportunities to be engaged with civics, properly educated on civics, and understand that, and encouraged really to take part in civics, how are you going to build that habit? So a civic desert kind of creates this another kind of cycle of disservice to American young people. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're right, like when I think of it that way, it is a cycle, because the more and more you feel shunned by the system, the less and less you feel inclined to do anything about it, because it's almost like it's not impacting you and you're not affecting it, so why even bother? And eventually you'll just be so distant away from it that there is no turning back. So the only way to do it is to bring them into the cycle as early as possible to avoid that.
Exactly. And I also kind of think about how politics just as a concept, right, has not opened up for young people, but especially young people of color or indigenous background or those who identify as part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And so it really comes back to this idea of, like, if you're not going to create a seat at the table for us, if you're not going to open the door for us, we're tired of waiting and we have to break through and do that ourselves. And on top of that, it's really become more so of like a, if not now, well, when, right?
Yeah.
Because like I said, voting, civic engagement, these are truly behaviors that are compounded by age and experience. And so that's why at 18 By, we really always focused on getting the youngest people involved in these cycles. Sure, you can't vote on paper. Of course, you can't vote when you're 14, 15, 16, 17. But if you learn about the processes, you're going to be a lot more equipped and ready to pre-register to vote, if you can do that in some states. And if you do that when you're 16 or 17 and you pre-register, you're more likely to be able to understand and actually follow through on going out to vote when you turn 18. And if you do that when you're 18, there's a high probability that you're going to keep going back and doing it for the rest of your life.
Right. You can't just push a baby to run a marathon as soon as it can start walking. You have to. There's an incubation process that has to go on that I think we often just don't think about, but it's so crucial, or arguably more crucial than the process itself, because without the incubation there is no process.
Absolutely. Without incubation there is no process.
Yeah. Wow. And one thing that you mentioned that really stood out to me is that, sure, participation in the voting aspect of, or our politics is not something that you see young people in, but even in the politics itself, until very recently, there weren't a lot of young people. It was a very homogeneous crowd, be it in ethnicity, be it in age demographics, in all regards. But recently, in the US and everywhere else, you've had this new wave of young politicians of color coming in with their ideas, demanding a seat at the table. Your AOCs and all these other fascinating and inspiring individuals. I'm wondering what that has done to the work that you all strive to do.
I really think that that's ignited it more, and it's helped bring in people from across, different communities and different political spheres of thought as well, to understand that, hey, politics is fun now. It is engaging. It is sexy. It's something that even I, maybe as a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old, can get involved in, because representation really matters. So when you see someone who's young really kind of like grabbing the bull by the horns and being, as no nonsense as a lot of these more junior, Congress people are, it ignites a sense of like, hey, I could probably do that too. And that's really fed our momentum. We've really, really been happy to see this upward trend of young people getting involved, meaningfully involved, not just with, their with understanding what's going on and reading the news more and being more tapped into what's going on in the country, but also taking tangible steps at the local level in their own communities. Some of our 18 by fellows, after they were in our fellowship program, they went on to work for their local city councils or join their regional chapters of the ACLU. And it's really that's the transformative power of putting young people in the spaces where they belong. They have not usually or previously been invited into, and saying, well, we're here and we're here to stay, and we're going to make change here because we know what we need.
Yeah. But politics is sexy overheard at Monk. Oh my god.
That's definitely on like the PCJ lounge or something like that, scribbled in the corner.
I mean, if it's not, when you get here, that's the first thing off the checklist.
Yeah.
But this makes so much sense, and I resonate with this myself in that getting young people involved does not mean that suddenly one of them goes on to run for president. It's getting them at the grassroots where they, I don't want to say where they belong necessarily, but where they've lived all their lives, and try to enact change right then and there in their communities. Because I think being able to see the impact that you're able to have with your work directly on the people that you care for can have such a transcendental effect on your perspectives and your outlook and almost your confidence in your own work and your capabilities. And that's just how it all starts.
Yeah, but it needs to start somewhere, right? So
Yeah.
I think, kind of the main idea that we have been operating with has been, let's get young people where they're at, and let's give them a basic background, foundational knowledge of voting behavior in the US. And on top of that, what are the issues that we're seeing on it? And actually also then, it might seem a little like, basic, right? Like, how exactly do you vote? What are the processes? It all sounds super boilerplate, but it's really not. And I don't think when I was growing up, anyone ever explained it to me. Voting was just such like an abstract concept. It's like, yeah, everyone votes. They're supposed to, right? But it's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to understand that when you have to do this for the first time, it can be super challenging because it's a system that's made to be confusing. And so, especially with this cycle, like, as you said before, young people getting involved with their local kind of like initiatives. In this election cycle, a lot of young people that we've been working with have kind of realized that Oh, it's not actually that hard as I thought or I perceived it to be involved in a local campaigning initiative, or to volunteer for a senator, or to have an internship with my local state congressperson. And it's really breaking down these barriers that we've built in ourselves of what exactly it means to be involved in politics with, okay, this is very lofty, but I can get started right now. I don't need to be, the biggest fish in the room to make a difference. I just need to have the courage and the spark.
Absolutely. And I think as you said this, I just realized that every time I think of voting or participating in the entire exercise, or even politics, it seems like such a nebulous concept that's just out there and is happening, but it seems too big to step into unless you know exactly what you're doing. But I think the more and more you learn about it and are in that environment, you realize that nobody knows what they're doing. Politics and the real world overall, but specifically politics. So you are as capable as anybody else till the time you're willing to give it the time and energy to figure it out.
And also have the kind of guiding hands that you need in order to get there. I think maybe in there was something about politics, that's the real wicked problem.
Right.
In all the definitions of that phrase.
Absolutely. Now, all this work, and I've said this many times, but I'll say it again, is very fascinating, and clearly the impact that you've had is felt all across the board by the people that you've affected. And I also know that this has received a lot of what critical applause is probably the best way to put it. And I probably don't even know the entire story, and I definitely haven't heard it from you directly. So I'm very intrigued myself. But what has that been like?
Well, so I really think that it's been, this whole journey with this past election has been a crazy, phenomenal roller coaster of just understanding the power that we have as an organization, and also just how exactly young people can make change in really unprecedented ways. We had very big goals for our fellowship program, and the way that it had worked and will be working as well for our next cycle is we take young people ages 14 to 19 all across the US who are interested in civic opportunity and engagement initiatives, and we give them a background first on voting in the states, and then we talk about the modalities of voting, and we have them go out in their own communities and understand, well, here are kind of the nuances between Kentucky and Kansas, or New York and California, and work with the rest of the fellows in their region to create ways to outreach with the other people in their local communities, and also, if they can, across multiple cities. Have them also, on top of that, work with social media experts, and also people who really understand how to practice active allyship and how to bring these traits of empathy and understanding, and most importantly, in my opinion, optimism back into politics, and to have the tools that they need to then take all of this and apply it into shaping their own understandings and their own opinions on policies in their local communities. From there, you run with it, and you write letters to your local newspaper, and you talk to your senators, and you demand accountability. And on top of that, of course, when there's elections, you are really the vanguard of voting, and you can help other young people or people who just don't really know how to do it, they've never really voted before, be involved in the process and make sure that they understand how to go forth and really take part in this really important civic process. And moreover than that, there's also the leadership skills that they gain from this, and it's coming from, oh, some people were like, we don't really understand a lot of like civics. Like I've never really worked in politics, or like I've done some volunteer work in my local community, but I've never really done anything related to elections or politics or things like that, and have them kind of get that spark that they need to then run with it and go and pursue larger opportunities and create their own initiatives. And so it's really this, ignition of young people all across the US to become inspiring leaders.
And I love that phrase that that analogy that you use of ignition, because I think it's not just about giving them the fire or telling them what to do, but rather empowering them and kindling and sparking something within them to do something far greater than you could possibly tell them or imagine them doing. Because sparking an idea is far, far more impactful than assigning a task.
Absolutely. It's very much so, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man how to fish, feed him for life kind of idea. And really the main thing that we wanted to achieve and we saw come to fruition during this whole process was how much unexplored potential there rests in just these 22 young people that were part of our program. So just imagine how much untapped potential there is all across the US, right? And it really empowered, like seeing young people empowered at this level was inspiring for me as well as maybe a young adult. But like, it's really inspiring for you as well to see people who are still in, high school or like, just entering college really take big issues and become leaders in their own community to deal with it and find ways to get their friends involved and stand up for things that they're passionate about and take all of this to create change that benefits them. It's inspiring to say the very least.
Absolutely. And untapped potential and harnessing untapped potential is a problem that I think it's funny how in our world now we either have overexploitation of resources or grossly untapped potential, and there seems to be no in between. But clearly one is definitely, in my mind almost, the second one is the worst problem to have, because missed opportunities hurt a lot more than failed attempts, so to say.
Well, I just think back to kind of how we transitioned into Georgia. So after the presidential election where we had our fellowship running, there was a Senate runoff election that was happening in Georgia State. And this was unprecedented at the time, and kind of really just felt like it just fell into our laps, and no one was expecting this, right? Because of all of this momentum that we had been driving from the first election, the general election, we were able to launch this rapid response task force. And we got our young fellows who were in Georgia, a few people who were also, around Georgia, or people who just were not in Georgia but they wanted to help out still, really come together right off the heels of the 2020 election to get the Georgian residents, equipped with the tools that they needed to understand what was a Senate runoff race, because I had never even heard of it before this time either. And there was a whole other, registration process, voting process, new deadlines to do things. And this task force, not only did we manage to do this through digital means, continuing what we had been doing in the first election, but we also were able to work with a bunch of other organizations to create this coalition that then went around and physically canvassed. And I think we knocked on about like 2,500 doors plus, which was amazing to have our own young people go and do this. And it was amazing also in the sense that they had created, two of our fellows who were running this in Georgia had created a pamphlet, a one-pager about the election, why it mattered, how to take part in it. And they were handing those out to people. And this was definitely, a direct result of the tools that they had been given during this program for the, whole fall semester, taking that and applying it to this extremely pivotal point in our, election history. And it was amazing to see how these efforts were then celebrated on a larger scale. When we were featured on the Daily Show with Trevor Noah to raise more awareness about the Senate runoff race was phenomenal, because not only did it come with the increased kind of eyeballs on us, but it came with an outpouring of support. People from all over wanted to help with our text banks and help volunteer with us and join our our in-person events in Georgia. And we managed to get, I think, almost 700,000 people ready for the Georgia Senate runoff elections in probably a span of 4 weeks. That was it.
Wow.
So it's really goes to show kind of it's a snowball effect. You start off by giving some people some tools, and when the moment of action comes, the fact that they can just catalyze on it and catapult into these huge events and create huge outreach goes to show that it's really it's both important of having the tools, having the resources, having the guidance, but also taking that, as we had said before, that spark and igniting it to make this motor run.
Wow. Well, the future is now. I don't know what they say to the others, but just hearing that and knowing how tough it is to get anything like this done, it's just insane. It's and the fact that this was done when amidst a global pandemic, with accessibility and reach being such a big issue, is so fascinating. I don't know about you, but I can only imagine how cathartic it must have felt to see this play out the way it did, because I'm sure it must be very reassuring, to say the very least, right?
Definitely. I mean, I like to kind of really consider myself as a policy wonk. It is kind of my favorite thing to do is to kind of crunch numbers and assess things and be very pragmatic about it and have a realistic overview based on the data that's in front of me. But I think that when it comes to elections and civic engagement, I'm an optimistic wonk about this, because I see what happened in November and then what happened in January, and these unprecedented levels of turnout, and how this has continued on even after we're 5 months out of elections, and there are still young people who are pushing for progressive policies and pushing for better resources in their local level, in their local levels, but also at the national level. And I think that the biggest kind of way that we can really help encourage this is to make sure that this doesn't become an every 4 years phenomenon. Young people need to be encouraged to take part in their civic opportunities in whichever avenue that shows up, all the time, every single year, because it's not just important to be voting for the president or for members of federal Congress, but your local state Congress people, your local town elected officials, they matter too. And I know before you've had Renee Gigato on, and she's also a fellow Monkland alum, and I remember watching her city councilor race, and just how inspiring that is to be a young person saying, the system is broken and I think I know how to fix it, and I'm going to go in there and give it my all to make some change. And sure, she didn't win the election, but she pushed the needle on important issues that matter for a lot of Torontonians. So it's the same kind of energy that I want to see catalyzed every single year, day in, day out.
Absolutely. No, I could not agree more. I could not agree more. And change is not something that happens periodically when the big poster stuff comes out. It happens every single day, every single moment, at the smallest, seemingly insignificant levels, because that's how it builds. And I'm wondering what your vision is, and I know this may sound very hoity-toity, but what your vision is to make that happen. How do you envision that materializing?
So I think that the best way to do that is to keep having programs like the ones that 18by has been doing, but also having the opportunity for young people to be involved with local initiatives, having coalitions between youth groups, really pushing this multidisciplinary, cross-sectoral collaboration as much as possible to get all sorts of young people who are interested in a plethora of social justice causes to meet with each other and interact. And I'm very proud of some of the work that we've been doing with a coalition that we were one of the founding members of, called Youth and Gov, that has been working to do exactly this. We have been really putting pressure on the Biden-Harris administration to effectively represent young people and give young people actual seats at the table by establishing an independent Office of Young Americans within the executive office of the president, and having a director of youth engagement as part of federal staff who oversees this and has young people, has a way to bring young people into the fold on domestic and foreign policy issues, and really creating a way to make sure that at the highest level of government, we don't forget our youngest constituents.
Yeah. And I think this was an important point to mention, because as important as the grassroots level initiatives are, organizations that have the resources to enact change, to bring about a cultural change almost, because that's what I see this as, at the highest levels, which then, I don't want to use trickle down because that's so cliche a word, but it spreads from that core to everywhere, and brings about that psychological and cultural shift, that shift in mindset, in just the way we approach politics and civic engagement.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider it trickle down either. I see it more as like flashbang, when you get when you get people passionate and revved up about issues that they're facing, some will go towards the local government side of things. Some will go towards community building and capacity creation, and others will go towards more kind of higher federal level systems. I think it's important that there are youth-focused advocates and kind of almost like youth stewards, right, across all of these areas, to make sure that whoever is interested to be part of it has someone there to cultivate. And it's really, I think, we had talked before about cycles. This is a cycle of empowerment. Right now, we've been seeing a lot of cycles of disinterest, right? In the past few elections, we always saw that. This is about making sure that wherever you go, there is a prominent conversation about having Gen Z involved in whatever is going on, because, like you said, we are the future, we are the now, and our opinions matter. And I think now what's kind of different in the cultural zeitgeist is that politicians are waking up to this idea.
Cycles of empowerment. I love that phrase, because it's almost like turning the heat back on in the other direction and turning the dial in the way that we want it to be turned into, and doing it ourselves rather than asking somebody to do it for us, which I think is, again, there's a confidence that develops there, which is so powerful. I'm wondering, and this is just something that came up right now in my mind. You have been away for more than a year now from the locus of action, which in a regular time would almost make you feel disconnected or distanced from all the action and everything that's happening. But I'm wondering how that is positively or negatively impacted in an online setting.
I mean, yeah, like, you know, we hadn't expected this to be happening the way that it has panned out, right? And I think what the biggest kind of takeaway for me has been, because this whole election cycle and even now into the spring and the summer, I've been in France, has been realizing that distance, time zones also, it doesn't stop you. It's not a barrier to being involved in what you're passionate in. And there are so many people who we've connected with through online spaces, like you and me, but there's also been a lot of other people, our fellows as well. Never had the privilege to meet any of these people in person, yet I feel like I know them so well from the conversations that we've had and the work that we've done together. And it's also kind of really shown to me that as long as you're hungry for it, you can do it no matter where you are in the world. It has also been very interesting, you know, from a cultural perspective, to watch political situations unfurl in Europe while working on these issues from more of an American standpoint, and knowing that I'm standing one foot between these two worlds that are so similar in some regards, and yet so utterly different in the way that they cater to their populations and the way that they engage their young people, or that they don't. You know, in France there is a very big protest culture, which I think it's a phenomenal way to make sure that you have your voice heard. And I just think about how that's met with so much violence and negativity in the States, whereas here it is also met with the same kind of, you know, negative reactions, but there's an underlying cultural tone of, but this is normal, this is routine. And so there have been a lot of kind of conversations I've been having with my friends and people around me of like, if we're having so many protests here, every other weekend there's a new cause that people are marching for, how much change can we have? Versus, you know, on the flip side, these, you know, smaller protests, sometimes local protests, don't garner enough attention or response, and people can feel disheartened by that. But at the same time, it's a little bit more, well, we're so passionate about it, so we're going to rally together, and really understand all these nuances between these two worlds has been, I would honestly say, it's been fascinating to just be an observer. I feel like that Monk 1 assignment where we had to do that ethnography, but I'm living it. And instead of Kensington Market, it's Paris, France, which, like, hey, scenery's not that bad.
Just hearing that makes me so curious to experience what that must be like, because you're so invested in the work yourself, but because of your physical location, you're almost detached from what's happening in your proximity, but at the same time, you're observing and you're learning, and the insights and perspectives and the worldviews that you can gain from just having that opportunity must be fascinating. And I know we say that word a lot. You know, just to wrap things up, everything that's been done so far is phenomenal. Where do you see the future leading, especially with this, dare I say, digital revolution in politics?
Definitely. I mean, I really think that the future is digital, and like you said before, young people are the future, and the future is now. And what I think one of the biggest takeaways from the programming that we did last cycle, and as we're thinking towards what's next, right, has been realizing that even as, you know, this pandemic subsides and we return to quote unquote whatever normal life was, right, it's still important to use civic like to use digital tools to enact civic engagement. And it's actually, I would say, one of the most powerful ways to get young people listening and capture them where they're at, to look at these issues and be exposed to it and learn something that, you know, is presented for them, to them in the way that they want to get their information, right? And use that as the jumping off point to get them involved in more in-person or tangible, quote unquote, right, ways to create social change. So I'm really excited to see how we can continue working through these, you know, using social media and like TikTok especially, and Instagram and all of this stuff to get content to young people about important issues in a way that's very easily digestible and palatable for them, and also really easy to kind of share across, right? And also on top of that, how we can keep using online tools to educate people about voting and their processes, and create systems that allow us to collect this information and then kind of course correct by looking at the data that we have and create this iterative process of like, well, you know, this really worked and this didn't, in order to move forward and create an even better system where we can reach all young people and make sure that all of them know how to vote and they're empowered to vote. And that's the dream, right?
That is the dream. That is the dream. The future is now. We are the future. And it is almost our duty and responsibility to not just earn the seat at the table, because it is our right, but ask for it, demand for it, get it, and then ignite that flame in this demographic which has so much untapped potential, and harness that and empower them to do with that what they will, rather than telling them what to do, because we don't even know the horizons and territories that they might chart and they might explore and they might conquer. And if that itself is something that everybody can take from this conversation, then I think there's a future out there that I personally am really looking forward to.
You and me both. I mean, I'm optimistic about the way forward, and I'm glad you are too.
Optimism is the way. Well, this has been such an interesting conversation, and I didn't even realize when the time went away. Thank you so much, Emma, for tuning in from one pond away. I look forward to seeing you for the first time in forever, and I wish you all the best with everything that you've got lined up. This has been another episode, another fascinating, intriguing episode of Different Boat, Same Storm. We'll be back again very soon. Different guest, same time, different boat, same storm. Thank you.